Right now, as you watch this video, one of the world's most devastating civil wars is raging in Myanmar. A conflict so complex and brutal that it makes headlines worldwide, yet remains largely misunderstood. This isn't just another military coup. This is what experts are calling the world's longest-running revolution, where between 150 to 300,000 people are actively fighting against one of the most entrenched military regimes on Earth. Since February 1st, 2021, Myanmar has descended into a chaos so complete that maps showing government versus rebel territory become outdated by the hour. Villages change hands daily. Entire regions exist in a state of perpetual warfare. And at the center of it all lies a military machine that doesn't just rule Myanmar, it owns it. Today, we're going to uncover the true story behind Myanmar's civil war, explore why this conflict has become so intractable, and examine what recent developments, including a devastating earthquake in March 2025, might mean for the future of this Southeast Asian nation of 55 million people. To understand Myanmar's current crisis, we need to grasp something unique about this country. The military doesn't just control Myanmar politically, they literally own it economically. This system was best described by Burmese communist intellectual Thakinso as military bureaucratic capitalism. The complete fusion of state power and monopoly capital through the military junta. The armed forces, known locally as the Tatmadaw, operate like a massive corporation with guns. Through conglomerates like Myanmar Economic Holdings Limited, they control everything from timber harvesting to banking, from telecommunications to beer production. Soldiers become shareholders, generals become corporate executives, and profit depends not on competition, but on coercion. This isn't just corruption, it's a complete economic model. When you buy a SIM card in Myanmar, you're likely paying the military. When buildings are constructed, they're using military-controlled cement. The banking system, military-linked. This system has devastated the economy, with workers facing wage collapses and inflation reaching up to 300% on basic goods, while the junta and their foreign partners, Singaporean banks, Thai gas traders, Russian arms dealers continue siphoning off the country's wealth. The 2016 election of Aung San Suu Kyi's National League for Democracy briefly suggested hope for reform. The NLD won a landslide victory, and many thought Myanmar was finally transitioning to democracy. But here's the crucial point. The Tatmadaw's economic empire remained virtually untouched. Violence against ethnic minorities continued unabated, including the horrific genocide of the Rohingya people. Military campaigns against the Kachin and Karen ethnic groups never stopped. Rather than challenging this system, the NLD focused on attracting foreign investment, essentially trying to work within the military's framework. In perhaps the most symbolic moment, in 2019, Suu Kyi herself went to The Hague to defend the military against genocide charges. But even this level of accommodation wasn't enough for the Tatmadaw. On February 1st, 2021, the military launched a coup, arresting Suu Kyi and other NLD leaders just hours before the new parliament was set to convene. The justification? Alleged electoral fraud claims that were never substantiated and were rejected by international observers. What happened next was unprecedented in Myanmar's modern history. Within days, the civil disobedience movement emerged, sparking a general strike led by labor unions that crippled the junta's revenue streams. Doctors refused to work in military hospitals. Railway workers abandoned their posts. Bank employees stayed home, essentially freezing the financial system. Civil servants across the country simply stopped showing up to work. This wasn't just political protest, it was economic warfare. Military's business empire, so dependent on a functioning state apparatus, began to hemorrhage money. For months, major cities like Yangon and Mandalay were essentially shut down. But the military's response was swift and brutal. They declared martial law, imposed internet blackouts, and began a campaign of mass arrests and killings. Peaceful protesters were shot in the streets. Entire neighborhoods were raided in the middle of the night. The death toll climbed rapidly. This brutality had an unintended consequence. It radicalized the resistance. Young urban professionals who had never held a weapon began seeking out armed training. Students fled to the borderlands to join ethnic armed groups that had been fighting the military for decades. The resistance was transforming from civil disobedience to armed revolution. Today, Myanmar's civil war involves between 60 and 200 armed groups. The exact number depends on how you count, because new militias form weekly while others merge or splinter. This includes everything from small ideologically driven units like the Communist People's Liberation Army, to fundamentalist Baptist groups like the Free Burma Rangers, to massive narco-ethno-nationalist armies such as the United Wa State Army. The most significant new development has been the emergence of the People's Defense Forces, or PDFs. Bamar majority militias formed primarily by young people who fled the cities after the coup. Unlike the established ethnic armed organizations, these PDFs operate as decentralized guerrilla units, blending hit-and-run tactics with local self-governance in areas when the Tatmadaw is absent. Maps often suggest clear territorial divisions between regime-held areas and rebel zones. But the reality is far more chaotic. Control shifts by the hour. Overlapping factions collect taxes, administer justice, and fight over the same villages, fields, and hills. It's what some analysts call a duopoly of violence, a fragmented landscape of competing authorities. In northern Shan State, the Brotherhood Alliance comprising the Tang National Liberation Army, the Myanmar National Democratic Alliance Army, and the Arakan Army has achieved remarkable success, defeating junta forces and disrupting key trade routes with China. In December 2024, the Arakan Army captured an entire regional military command, only the second time this has happened in 5 months, demonstrating the military's increasingly precarious position. But this fragmentation is also the resistance's greatest weakness. The National Unity Government, dominated by Yusuk's exiled NLD, has failed to centralize command. Ethnic minority leaders remain deeply distrustful of Bamar majority organizations, prioritizing local autonomy over a unified revolutionary program. Many PDF militias receive little or no support from the so-called government in exile, relying instead on crowdfunding and homemade weaponry. As one fighter from the Karen National Defense Force recently explained, "We've lost everything: our homes, our jobs, our dreams. We have to fight the Burmese military, but we remains fractured into dozens of separate we's. The numbers are staggering and constantly climbing. The United Nations reports that over 3 million civilians have been displaced. That's more than 5% of Myanmar's entire population forced from their homes. More than 75,000 people have died since the coup, though the real number is likely much higher given the difficulty of documenting deaths in active conflict zones." According to the Assistance Association for Political Prisoners, as of April 2025, 6,486 civilians have been killed during the civil war, including 1,494 women and 751 children. But these are only the documented cases. In rural areas where much of the fighting occurs, many deaths go unrecorded. The military strategy has been described as scorched earth, burning villages, bombing schools and hospitals, blocking humanitarian aid, and deliberately targeting civilian infrastructure. This isn't collateral damage. It's a systematic campaign designed to make life impossible in areas that support the resistance. The economic collapse has been equally devastating. The Myanmar kyat has lost over 70% of its value since the coup. Basic necessities like rice and cooking oil have become luxury items for many families. The healthcare system, already weakened by the civil disobedience movement, has essentially collapsed in many regions. International humanitarian organizations estimate that 18.6 million people, more than one-third of the population, need humanitarian assistance. Yet delivering aid has become nearly impossible due to the ongoing conflict and the military's restrictions on access. Foreign powers are adapting to Myanmar's chaos in ways that often perpetuate the conflict. China, Myanmar's largest trading partner and neighbor, is hedging its bets, maintaining ties with both the junta and ethnic armed groups to protect its massive infrastructure projects and secure its southern border. Chinese companies continue major investments while Beijing quietly engages with rebel groups controlling border areas. Russia and Pakistan continue supplying arms to the Tatmadaw, providing the military with fighter jets, armored vehicles, and advanced weaponry. These arms deals aren't just business, they're lifelines keeping the military viable despite its territorial losses. Thailand profits from the chaos through migrant labor and border trade. While officially maintaining a policy of non-interference, Hundreds of thousands of Myanmar refugees and migrant workers provide cheap labor for Thai industries. Western sanctions, while extensive on paper, have failed to significantly dent the junta's funding channels. Singaporean banks still process military profits through complex networks. Indian companies continue purchasing natural gas from junta-controlled firms. The military's economic empire has proven remarkably resilient to international pressure. Perhaps most critically, the international community remains divided on how to respond. ASEAN's principle of non-interference has prevented coordinated regional action. And with global attention focused on wars in Ukraine and eventually the genocide in Gaza, Myanmar's crisis has faded from international headlines despite its escalating severity. On March 28, 2025, a devastating 7.7 magnitude earthquake struck central Myanmar, killing over 3,700 people and displacing hundreds of thousands more. The disaster hit the worst possible place at the worst possible time. Right in the middle of active conflict zones where government and rebel forces had been fighting for control. In a rare moment, the earthquake briefly paused the civil war. The National Unity Government declared a 2-week pause on offensive operations to coordinate humanitarian efforts. Even some ethnic armed groups announced humanitarian pauses. The military junta, facing international pressure and desperate for aid, eventually declared its own ceasefire until April 22nd. But these ceasefires revealed the fundamental problem with Myanmar's conflict. There's no unified command structure that can actually enforce peace. Within days of the announced truces, fighting resumed. The military continued airstrikes against rebel-held villages. According to the NUG, the Myanmar military's aerial and artillery attacks killed at least 72 civilians in the days immediately following the earthquake. The disaster also highlighted how the civil war has made humanitarian response nearly impossible. Aid organizations couldn't reach affected areas due to ongoing fighting. The military blocked assistance to rebel-controlled regions. Ethnic armed groups were suspicious of government-coordinated relief efforts. It should have been a moment of national unity, instead demonstrated how completely Myanmar has fragmented. As one aid worker noted, "We're trying to conduct earthquake relief in the middle of a war zone where no one trusts anyone else." Earthquake may have killed thousands, but the war has made saving the survivors exponentially more difficult. For over 7 decades, observers have predicted the Tatmada's imminent collapse, only to watch it survive crisis after crisis. However, there are signs that this time might be different. Military defections are increasing. Entire units have switched sides, bringing their weapons and intelligence with them. The military's recruitment has become so desperate that they're conscripting teenagers and forcing civil servants into combat roles. Hardly the marks of a confident force. The economic foundation of military power is cracking. The Myanmar Kayat's collapse has devastated military salaries and procurement. International sanctions, while imperfect, have made it harder for the military to access advanced weaponry and spare parts. The general strike's long-term effects on state revenue continue to compound. Most significantly, the military has lost control of vast territories. In some regions, they've essentially retreated to fortified positions in major towns, ceding rural areas to various resistance groups. The loss of border crossings to ethnic armed groups has disrupted crucial revenue streams from trade taxes and smuggling operations. However, we must be cautious about predicting the Tatmada's demise. They retain superior firepower, control of major cities, and support from key international partners. Their scorched earth strategy, while morally reprehensible, has proven militarily effective in the past. The question isn't whether the military is weakening. It clearly is. The question is whether that weakening will lead to meaningful change or simply a more desperate and violent military clinging to power. The resistance's greatest strength, its diversity and grassroots nature, is also its fundamental weakness. The opposition remains deeply fragmented, lacking both unified command and a shared vision for Myanmar's future. The National Unity Government, dominated by NLD figures, essentially wants to return to the pre-coup status quo, the same system that failed to prevent the coup in the first place. They speak of democracy and human rights, but offer little concrete vision for addressing the military's economic stranglehold or the ethnic minorities' demands for genuine federalism. Ethnic armed organizations, many of which have been fighting the central government for decades, have their own agendas. Some seek full independence. Others want genuine federal autonomy. Most are deeply skeptical of any Myanmar majority government, having been betrayed repeatedly throughout Myanmar's history. The People's Defense Forces, while militarily effective in some areas, lack coordination even among themselves. Some align with the NUG, others operate independently, and a few have formed local alliances with ethnic groups. Their political objectives often extend no further than get rid of the military, which isn't a governing program. This fragmentation has real military consequences. Resistance groups sometimes fight each other over territory or resources. Intelligence isn't shared. Coordinated operations are rare. Military, despite its weakening position, can still exploit these divisions through divide-and-conquer tactics. Most critically, none of the major opposition forces has articulated a clear alternative to the military bureaucratic capitalist system. As the communist intellectual Thakinso argued decades ago, a system built on militarized exploitation cannot be reformed. It must be dismantled. But dismantling requires both victory and a plan for what comes next. So where does Myanmar go from here? Analysts have identified several possible scenarios, none of them particularly optimistic in the short term. The most likely scenario, according to most experts, is continued fragmentation and prolonged conflict. The military survives in a weakened state, controlling major cities and strategic infrastructure while losing rural areas to various resistance groups. This creates a de facto partition of the country with multiple competing authorities and ongoing low-level warfare. A second scenario involves the military's gradual collapse, but without a unified opposition ready to take power. This could lead to a dangerous power vacuum. With different regions controlled by different ethnic armed groups, PDFs, or local strongmen, Myanmar could become a failed state, with all the humanitarian and security implications that entails. A third, more optimistic scenario sees the opposition overcoming its divisions to present a unified challenge to the military regime. This would require unprecedented cooperation between the NUG, ethnic armed organizations, and PDF's cooperation that would need to extend beyond military tactics to include agreement on political objectives and post-conflict governance. The least likely but most dangerous scenario is complete military victory through overwhelming force. This would require the military to receive massive international support, probably from China or Russia, to crush all resistance movements. The humanitarian cost would be enormous, and the resulting state would be little more than a militarized police state. The 2025 earthquake has added a new variable to these scenarios. Natural disasters sometimes create opportunities for peace, as happened in Indonesia's USA province after the 2004 tsunami. But they can also exacerbate existing conflicts, as we've seen in Syria and other war-torn regions. Myanmar's crisis ultimately comes down to a fundamental question. Can a system built on militarized exploitation be reformed, or must it be completely dismantled and rebuilt? The optimists point to signs of change. A new generation of Myanmar citizens has been radicalized by the coup and will never accept military rule. Ethnic minorities and Myanmar majority populations are cooperating in unprecedented ways. The military's economic model is under severe stress. International isolation is increasing costs for the regime's foreign supporters. The pessimists note that Myanmar has been in various states of civil war for over 7 decades. The military has survived every previous crisis. The opposition remains fragmented. Regional powers prioritize stability over democracy, and the international community has shown little appetite for the sustained engagement that conflict resolution requires. What happens next depends on whether Myanmar's workers, peasants, and ethnic fighters can transform scattered resistance into a decisive challenge to the military bureaucratic capitalist order. This would require not just military success, but political maturity, the ability to forge a genuinely inclusive national vision that addresses decades of ethnic marginalization and economic exploitation. The stakes couldn't be higher. Success could create a democratic, federal Myanmar that serves as a model for the region. Failure could mean the country's complete collapse, with devastating consequences for its 55 million people and regional stability. As that Karen fighter said, they have lost everything: their homes, their jobs, their dreams. They have to fight. but fighting is the easy part. Building something better afterward, that's the real challenge. If this analysis helped to clarify the question, like the video, share and leave your thoughts on comments below.